Hello and welcome to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson, a podcast for those seeking the ultimate in wine, food, and travel. Each week she interviews winemakers, chefs, celebrities, and a variety of guests that shape the way we enjoy life.
This is Ilona Thompson with Palate Exposure. I'm here today with Cameron Douglas, Master Sommelier, actually the only Master Sommelier from New Zealand, and there's a total of whopping 240 worldwide, so it's a pretty special crown to wear. I have had the privilege of listening to some of his remarks at the Sauvignon Blanc conference in Marlborough, and a few other bits and pieces. He has exceptional depth and breadth of knowledge, and I cannot wait to get to know him on a personal and professional level. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you. So I'm going to start from the very beginning. You're obviously from New Zealand, but tell us about your background, your childhood, how did you come to know wine, all that good stuff.
Okay, well, I'm very young at 53 years of age, and I grew up in Auckland, in West Auckland. Went to, my schooling was all there, and fast forward to high school, I left quite early, disillusioned a little bit by the education system and the choices that I had, but the biggest catalyst for me leaving school was a careers advisor told me that, no, Cameron, you're not smart enough to be an airline pilot. You need to think of something else. And
Ouch.
Crushed my dreams, just absolutely crushed my dreams. But I guess in hindsight, that led to all sorts of different pathways in my life that now brings us together sitting here. So I left high school quite early, and in those days you could get a job quite quickly, and I went straight into the banking scene, became a bank teller for about 18 months, and in my second year as a bank teller I started moonlighting in hospitality to try and make more money. I got a job at a Hyatt hotel in their banquet department, and I think that was probably the first real change in my life, because you work all sorts of different hours in a hospitality context, and so what do you do after work? You go night clubbing, you go to restaurants late or cafes late, and I was able to actually increase my income more in hospitality than I did in banking. So I actually left that and went full-time into the hospitality scene. It suited me. I felt good being there. A little while later on, I decided that what was it that I liked the most about hospitality, and that at the time was cooking. And so I found myself a few jobs in kitchens, learning how to cook. And that was and I had an amazing time, because there's a strong connection between aromas and flavors and food and even textures, and ultimately wine as well. So a lot of my foundation nose, if you like, was done in the kitchens of cafes and restaurants.
Wow.
And ultimately that led to some work with a couple of key chefs in New Zealand at the time, and learning really different disciplines in food, but no formal training. So there's no formal training coming into this conversation at all. And that was great fun for a time. I decided that, like many New Zealanders, I wanted to go and live overseas. And I ended up moving to London for a while, getting a job in a shoe store. I couldn't find a job in a kitchen, in a shoe store. And I did that for a while, and that gave me the opportunity to travel a little bit to Europe as well. And that was great fun. No wine at this point in time. And I think along the way I'd met Janet, my wife, and said goodbye. We hadn't gotten married yet. But there was a strong pull back to New Zealand because of her.
Of course.
And came back to New Zealand ultimately, and we've been together for over 30 years, married for nearly 25 years.
A milestone right there.
And so we're very, very happily ensconced together.
It's a big deal having a partner like that, life partner.
But what I went back into a kitchen for a time, and there were a couple of redundancies along the way, so it made me question if I really wanted to stay in a kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I moved to front of house and started working tables.
Mm-hmm.
At that time as a waiter, didn't really know the world of wine as such. I served a lot of it, but I really wasn't that well versed in it at all. And then there came a time where I got a position. Well, I drank a lot of wine. I think that's part of any sommelier's background story. You end up drinking a lot. But there came a time where I thought, what is it really that I want to do? Because I was at an age, there's this tipping point in your life, is do you carry on or do you actually do something different? I was at this crossroads, if you like. But I did decide at the time what I enjoyed the most about front of house was wine. And there were people that I watched and learned from who developed conversations at the table, and they were telling them stories about the wine, stories about their travel, stories about the winemakers, and the engagement tableside was completely different from what I was doing, which is essentially taking food and beverage orders and delivering them. The engagement wasn't the same. So I decided that I think that I'd like to do that.
So the storytelling part, the social glue, the conversation starter, it wasn't really the flavor profile of the wine necessarily.
Not
okay.
yet. No, not yet
Okay.
at all. So I got a position in a couple of different restaurants where Janet was actually working as well.
Oh, cool.
And we discovered just briefly at those times that we worked quite well together. There was no one-upmanship. It was just like, this is the job, this is what we're doing, these are the customers, and we worked really, really well together. But ultimately I got a job as a sommelier at a Sheraton hotel in Auckland and started working in their fine dining restaurant. And that was a position that I held for 5 years, although I did move to their front office for a time as well. Concurrently, I decided that education was something that I needed and went back to school. So I went part-time at Polytechnic, learning application software and getting hospitality credentials and management credentials along the way, just passing these little bits. And that kept my mind busy in a different way as well. So I had this career that was building in hospitality, but I was getting back into education as well. And I think if you get back into education on your own terms, then it's a lot smoother rather than being pigeonholed or pushed into it. So ultimately, I got a degree in education. It took me 8 years part-time, and I got a degree in education, all the while working at a hotel. And then once I moved out of the hotel, I went to a restaurant, very famous restaurant in Auckland at the time called Vinnie's Restaurant. And who happened to be working there was Janet, my wife.
How about that?
So we were together at that restaurant for 10 years. And most of the time she was my boss, and I was the sommelier.
It's extraordinary, right there.
Yeah.
I mean, just pausing on that, it's like, wow.
But like I said, we work really well together.
Yeah.
It's like, these are the jobs, we just get on with it, and you steal a kiss every now and again in the corridor of the restaurant, but that's, these things, that's part of the story as well. Anyhow, whilst I was working at this restaurant, I learned about credentials as a sommelier. And I didn't really know too much about it, but I thought that it was something that I'd like to explore. And literally 6 months later, I had learned that there was a man called Evan Goldstein who was a master sommelier in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I contacted him, and he allowed me access to enroll in the Quartermaster Sommeliers program in the USA. Because being in New Zealand, in Australasia, there wasn't a clear pathway to that. And at that time, there was only one Court of Master Sommeliers globally.
Right.
Nowadays, there's 2 chapters. There's a British chapter and the USA chapter, or the Americas. Anyhow, long story short, one of our friends that we'd made whilst I was working at the Sheraton was a flight attendant for United. And we used to go to Las Vegas and spend some time with her and her family. And when the CMS program came along, the program was in Las Vegas. So I did my introductory certificate for the Quartermaster Sommeliers at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas. And I had accommodation. Yeah, so all these, stars were beginning to align. But there was a lot of uncertainty and pressure, mental pressure, because I just didn't know if I knew enough to get through this program. And it was very intimidating, because back then in the Bellagio ballroom, 150 candidates listening to these master sommeliers wax lyrical about wine and countries, and here's the microphone and you start talking about wine in front of these people who were ultimately your peers. And it was very intimidating. And there was an exam, of course, at the end of it, and I very fortunately passed that. But there was one man at the front of the room who gave me my certificate and eyeballed me, and his name was Fred Dame, Master Sommelier Fred Dame, and he said, if you want to go further in this program, I will help you. And it was like the sun burst through the clouds. It was like, now I know what I want to do. This person gave me faith in myself. I had enough experience and study ethic to pass. It's just like the floodgates opened, and there I was. Okay, now I know what I want to do. Fred and I have been friends for a long time now. We're having lunch with him on Monday. So
how cool is that?
Yeah. So I got home, said to Janet, I'm going to be a master sommelier one day. And she said, okay. And it took nearly 8 years to get through to becoming one, because it's just, there's so much study involved and so much preparation and wine tasting. But in the meantime, in the background, I guess when you're studying for a credential such as a Master Somm, you have to make sacrifices. So the TV gets turned off, you don't go to the movies, and your spare time is spent reading and joining tasting groups and so on. I had no tasting groups in New Zealand. So I was on an aeroplane to California a lot, because it was cheaper than London, and camped out in this house here.
It's your friend's home.
This is George's house, and we became friends through wine and dog circles. That's a whole other story.
Got it. Different podcast.
Yeah, but George has been a fabulous supporter and friend all the way through, even today, and allowed me to stay here. So I caught train into town every time I was here and joined tasting groups and study groups. And so it was a very expensive undertaking, but a necessary one in order to get the chunks of the learning done and your palate trained into the system that the CMS has.
Have you ever been discouraged along the way? This is a massive commitment, mental, emotional, and financial.
I've never been discouraged. I've been asked to make sure that I'm checking my goals against the pressures of life at the same time, but it was always there. And the sacrifices that I was talking about included stepping out of the hospitality sector nearly completely, not totally, but nearly completely, in favor of an income that was more supportive of what I was trying to achieve. So with my degree, I got a job at a university. And although I'd gotten the job at the university anyway, this made sense to keep that job and lessen the hospitality stuff.
Because the hours are wild and it just takes a lot out of you.
It sure does. And I got some great support from the university as well, allowing me to do all this travel. So all these pieces now had started coming together. And I passed all of my exams in the USA. At the time, there was a scholarship or several scholarships, funnily enough, available in the program, but there was one scholarship that I could apply for to go to London to sit exams as well. I had 4 goes at my master sommelier exams. The first time I sat, I got nothing. I didn't pass anything. But that was a valuable lesson to learn as well. You don't give up in this program. The second time I took the test, I passed the service exam under, Evan Goldstein and Fred Dame were there, and Shane Bjornholm was there. All these famous masters. Tim Gazer was there. They were my examiners. And the third time I went through, because I was on the clock now, I had to get the tasting and the theory passed within 2 years, or I was resetting and had to start again.
Mm-hmm.
And the third time I took the exam, I didn't get those other 2 parts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had one more chance before I reset. So it was suggested I applied for the scholarship, which I did, and I got the scholarship, which essentially paid my airfare and a lot of accommodation to get to London from New Zealand to take the exam again in the same year. And that was in November 2007, and I got those other 2 parts. So I became a master sommelier in America and the UK.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Is that very uncommon?
It's totally uncommon now, because there are since that time the American chapter and the British chapter manage their own education and examining programs, and whilst the levels are the same, and they certainly edit each other's exams and so on, nobody can do that anymore. You can't sit one part in the US and another part in the UK. Since that time, that's all changed. My diploma is a British diploma, though, and it's got Brian Julian's name on the bottom of it. But anyhow, then the floodgates of something else opened up, and that's notoriety. And becoming the first master somm at that time in the Southern Hemisphere and Australasia and New Zealand was a big deal, and they can never take that away from you. Not that I want anything like that to happen, but it was a wonderful opportunity for me to start doing other things as well. And I think the word master and master sommelier means a lot, or it carries a lot of weight, or mana as we call it in New Zealand. And you, if you're going to be a master, you are a mentor. You are somebody that is there to encourage the next generation to come through. You pay it forward now. You can do that through kindness, taking a phone call, helping people with their tasting, or you can take a deep dive in and be an active member of the Court of Master Sommeliers, or you're doing something to help other people. And that was kind of in my bones anyway. I was an educator, and so I suddenly started getting phone calls and emails from people, from Brazil to Russia, saying, I want to be a somm. I heard you might be able to help me. Can you help me get started? Or I live in the middle of nowhere in, the Midwest of the USA. I feel really alone. How do I get started?
It's fascinating that they would just find you and reach out to you specifically. There must have been something compelling about your
here's
journey.
another story. A very good friend of George's, whom we met just through our time here in Los Altos over the years, worked for Google.
Oh.
And her job at Google was running the film unit. So there was a time where she and a camera crew followed me around on my study hops around America, filming me tasting with masters and showing my journey. And once I became a master, they filmed a speech I gave at Google, and that's still on YouTube and people can watch it. I had a lot more hair back then, I can tell you, and that was accessible globally, I guess, and so people found out about me through that talk that I gave as well, so they could just reach out to me on email quite quickly. And so now I'm in a position where I'm a lecturer at a university, and I'm still at that same job. I'm running the beverage program for the Auckland University of Technology. I am on a judging panel for this and that, so I've travelled the world as a wine judge. I'm the chair of judges for the Canberra International Riesling Challenge in Australia. I have my own website. I have my own wine review program, and I'm now writing for 4 magazines as well.
You're busy.
Super busy, but it's all the same topic, if you like. It's all beverages and food. So I'm kind of doing what I love.
So back in 2007, what was the state of New Zealand wine, specifically in that context? What, in your observation, was it like back then for New Zealand?
Well, New Zealand historically has gone through these big sort of growth phases in the wine sector. And in the early 2000s, in that sort of 2007 period, was a time of investment and growth for sure. There was a lot of international investment, a lot of US dollars buying brands or US dollars co-owning. And so it was a period of growth, but also a much bigger understanding and liking for varieties outside the Sauvignon Blanc reputation. So Pinot Noir was becoming a big deal back then. And, you know, the rest is history as far as that's concerned. And so I guess the industry itself, I get, you know, they embraced the sommelier thing. A lot of people still don't know what a Somm is. They're growing. You know, that Somm movie, you know, helped a lot for sure. But it was also a growth time in terms of the hospitality sector and restaurants. And there were a lot of restaurants opening, a lot of cafes opening, and getting people out of their homes into dining out. It was also a change in terms of the type of dining that people were doing. You know, fine dining was still a thing, and white tablecloths and silver and nice china and great glassware, but it was at a time where it was beginning to tire a little. So the idea of great chefs, great food, but not so formal in terms of dining, was starting to appear. It was on the back of the rise of the cafe, because the cafe culture was booming ahead. A lot of people were not going to restaurants in favour of cafe because they just wanted to eat some nice food in a social setting. So restaurants had to buck their ideas up, and this was happening in that period. Coffee was already very strong. Beer culture was building. The garage type beer was starting to show back then. It's exploded since. And then home distilleries, well, not domestic home distilleries, just New Zealand made spirits were starting to appear as well, but not that many.
It sounds like a very exciting time. And there you were, essentially what you described, you have a very internationalized, meaning, you know, cosmopolitan. You had exposure to so many wine markets and so many different conversations with the members of the trade worldwide.
Yeah.
But you are, in fact, in New Zealand, and you're probably assessing, kind of taking in the temperature at the time what's happening. What was your mind at? Did you want to really represent New Zealand and become this goodwill ambassador at the time, or did it evolve?
I think it was a little bit organic and evolved in its own way, because even after passing the sommelier master exams, I was still hopping on an aeroplane. In fact, that increased. And I was always loading my suitcase with New Zealand wines to share with fellow masters, with restaurateurs, with friends I made along the way. And social media was a great friend, because you could start posting these pictures of, or telling the stories of New Zealand wine through pictures and social media platforms, and taking the message back. So organically I suddenly became, and self-titled, the unofficial ambassador of New Zealand wine, because I was over here so much, and I was in Australia and I was in London, that it made sense. and I was happy to do it, and it was great fun.
New Zealand wine is often associated in consumers' minds with Sauvignon Blanc. That's kind of a natural go-to.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that assessment? Is it not comprehensive enough of a perception? What is your take on that?
Well, Sauvignon Blanc is certainly the backbone of our wine industry in New Zealand, and will continue to be that way for a long time to come. It is a great association. It's like, bungee jumping in New Zealand and Lord of the Rings in New Zealand, Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand. It is so strong that it overshadows a lot of the other varieties that we are very proud of, and that we're trying to show wine drinkers around the world how good these other varieties are. And it's very tough to do that for a number of different reasons, not the least of which is that Sauvignon Blanc is so strong, and we're very happy about that. But the New Zealand dollar means that any other variety that is more expensive to make, like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, are a much tougher ask to get into a market, say for example in the USA, because the average price of a bottle of wine landed in the USA is much, much higher than that, say, coming from Chile or the south of France or even parts of Italy and Spain. So we're also faced with the challenge of the reputation of all those other countries' wines who do similar varieties, where we're now competing with them. We're hoping, and starting to see some change, but we're hoping that the drinking public in the USA are reaching out for something different, and may look to the Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs and Rieslings of New Zealand to add to their understanding.
I've come to regard New Zealand in my own mind as a freak of nature. It just has a confluence of climatic and geographical conditions that's unmatched. It goes without saying that every wine region is unique unto itself, but New Zealand just has this edge that I can't even articulate to you, but you feel it when you're there. You just know it. You feel it in your bones. I wonder if there's a way to, or is there a way to communicate to a wine drinker, a wine consumer, those unique qualities that attribute to the wine that they're purchasing in other varieties specifically, like Chardonnay or Riesling or Pinot Noir for that matter. How do you actually articulate that edge?
Wow, that's a great question, and I'm not sure I can answer that unless I know that sometimes, people like yourself who've been to New Zealand, you get off a plane and to me the air smells different down there, and I think the sky is a little bit brighter, and the grass does seem greener, and there is this exuberance and freshness and natural feel about New Zealand, because it's not well populated. There are a lot of sheep there, and a lot of deer and cows and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of forest. And whilst like any country in the world we have our challenges, it's relatively still young and fresh and vibrant, and I think that allows this organic symbiotic relationship with the products that we have. For example, the wines that we produce, we don't have to massage flavors in wine.
Yes.
We do to a degree, but it's far less than some of our counterparts do. So that brightness, that freshness, that crispness, that natural flavour is all there on its own youthful way.
I love how you describe this very contextual, natural transition. Even mechanically speaking, the dairy industry in New Zealand really facilitated in a lot of ways the wine industry. And then, of course, the nature is just so self-evident that a lot of people talk about hands-off, less manipulative approaches to wine. But for you, you don't necessarily even have to have this discussion. It shows up, in fact, so well. So I've thought over the years, maybe some of what the marketing trepidation is that there's such largesse that you almost like walking it back a little bit. You're almost like embarrassed because you don't have to work as hard as some others. So I always found it kind of curious in terms of marketing discussions in New Zealand. There's almost that like I said, kind of a pushback. It's like, well, but it's sour savvy, but it's the best in the world for what it is.
I agree.
The conclusion of this interview can be found in the next podcast, already available for your download. Thanks again for tuning in to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson.